Alright, I'm back with a Path of Exile 2 video, which I think is the first time I've covered this specifically in a video. It has taken up, essentially all of my gaming time, most of my free time. I put down Marvel Rivals once it arrived, which is not, some great shock. And I've been playing, as much as I possibly can. I'm currently in Act 3, somewhere in the middle of it, and, I come from a long history of Diablo, especially 3 and most recently 4, so you might think like, oh, you like super casual Diablo, you're not going to like this. No, I really do like Path of Exile quite a bit. It is certainly a departure from the current state of Diablo. It is certainly a throwback very specifically to Diablo 2, which I know is what a lot of people, wanted to see from an ARPG, and I know Path of Exile has, been down this path for many, many years now. I have very, very limited experience in Path of Exile in its current state. I played, I don't know, a couple dozen hours many years ago, but so anything I talk about here may be true of Path of Exile also, but this is, my first real dive into the game in a number of years. It is very clear pretty quickly what the main differences are between Path of Exile 2 and something like Diablo. This is a much more methodical game in terms of, like, you're not just sort of like ripping through 100 enemies on the screen at any given time. It is slower paced. There are, enemy density can ramp up over time, but each sort of elite encounter is its own little thing rather than just kind of, blowing things up. Each boss encounter is something that can, but depending on what it is, not the one I'm currently playing or showing here because my build is doing currently very well for the current level. But many, many bosses, depending on your build, your character, your level, can be very challenging. I've heard this described as Dark Souls as an ARPG. It's not quite that extreme, but I certainly get the connection there. This is a game that does not have any difficulty settings, so it's essentially you run into bosses that are potentially walls for you. Everyone sort of has probably run into this at some point. I know a lot of people were struggling with the end of act bosses. Strangely, those were ones where I was able to beat those in one or two chances, but then I've run into certainly many other ones that have taken far more than that, as some, I'm a ranger, and some are really not conducive to being a ranger, and took, some more leveling, some more investment, things like that. And then, of course, you have your moment-to-moment mob clear and elite killing in the main dungeons. I really enjoy the way this is set up, as opposed to Diablo. I know that you can log in, and the skill tree is just, like, massively overwhelming. It's this giant, sprawling, intense thing that can be intimidating, but once you realize it's the skill tree for like every class combined together, it makes a little more sense. There are relatively straightforward paths for your specific class and ascendancy, but if you really want to, branch out and start at one place and go, way north or way south and get into another class of skills, you can do that, which results in a really, really large number of creative builds that you really can't see in a lot of other games. And it's still pretty early, so I don't know how many people have done like super elaborate mix and match builds. I am currently doing this Ranger Lightning Deadeye build. I will give full credit to Moxsy, my go-to YouTuber for doing max damage to all things in all games. Some people have said like, oh, like how can you use another person's build? Like, the whole point of a game like this is to find your own build and experiment and stuff. It's like, that's some people's point, but my point is also to have fun. And I have fully had fun, being able to ramp up my power with some sort of, guideline in place where this is a game where you can run into dead ends pretty easily with a build. And if you want to dramatically respec or something, you've invested a ton of material, some of which you can't get back. Some of which things like respecking skill points will just wipe out your gold reserves completely. So, I don't have a million years to do trial and error with builds here, and I am really enjoying this lightning build. It's just ramping up in power over time, which I find very fun. And, you know, periodically I do run into walls, and I just fought a boss that would essentially one-shot me anytime I did a misstep. So, very much, yeah, like some of the Dark Souls, Elden Ring stuff. And story, I don't really understand the story. There's some beast we have to stop. But in terms of the campaign itself, I think it has some very creative aspects. The end of act bosses specifically, with all their different phases, there's like, you know, 3 or 4 different phases in a lot of these, I find very cool. Even normal bosses, the way their attacks and strategies sort of ramp up over time, is something that you have to kind of learn and adapt to, and I think that is executed very well. There's some interesting level stuff too, with everything is more than, well, not everything, but a lot of things are more than just sort of running through the dungeon, clearing it, that's it. There's some kind of unique objectives in a way you don't often see in other games. There's this activity called the Trial, where it's like you go through different rooms and they have different modifiers and things, and you can't lose too much life as you get through it, and so like you'll fail. It's not just that you can't die, and you can't die, but you can't lose all your life by the end. That system's a little punishing for me, but it's at least a creative activity. I ran into some very annoying circumstances there where I killed the boss at the same time that I died, and the game is very unforgiving with this. So not only do you lose loot, you have to do the entire thing over again, which has happened a couple times for me. I really hope they are able to modify that. There are some aspects in here that I feel like are carryovers from old Path of Exile or Diablo 2 for its own sake, in a way that I don't think adds to the game, and it's just sort of like, well, this is the way it's always done, so we're going to do it again. That's things like identifying items. I don't really see the point of. It's not like it's difficult, and I have more scrolls of wisdom that I know what to do with, or you just go back to town and the guy instantly does it. Again, this is the way it's always been. I don't see the point in doing it this way. I would say more annoying is this desire to keep doing this Tetris-shaped inventory system where these giant things take up 8 slots at a time, so you can only hold, you know, 5 or 6 pieces of loot that you loot before you have to go back to town and sell them or salvage them or whatever. You know, Diablo 2 or Diablo 3 and 4, no, I think 3 and 4. They you know, they kind of made everything uniform size so you can hold a lot more stuff before needing to go back to town. Again, I don't really get the purpose of something like that, and it's not the end of the world. It just seems like, oh, we're really trying to be, you know, a classic ARPG rather than something modern. And I feel like some of that carries over and works, some of it doesn't, and they're minor things, but it is something that I find rather strange. In terms of progression, I've seen people say that the game is too hard and too frustrating, and I get it. Like, if you are one of these people who are like, oh, I'm just gonna completely make a build from scratch, it is easy to just run into a spot where you're like, well, I do not have the damage to do anything here, and I'm not really sure how to continue without just tons and tons of grinding to totally reinvest in everything. So I do get why people can get stuck places, but I am not in the camp of like, well, just nerf this or that, make things easier. I don't think that is the way things should be. I do like that this is a unique setup for difficulty and kind of learning as you go. I don't really know what the ultra endgame of this is. I think there's New Game Plus, maybe some endgame activities, but it's very clear that it's going to take a long time to get there. I am, 25 hours into the game, somewhere in Act 3. I think there's 6 acts, so the idea of like 40 to 50 hours to even just beat the campaign is certainly true, and certainly not the case with, you know, Diablo games in terms of how long those campaigns were. And a lot of this can be, you know, trial and error. I do think some of these zones are like absurdly long, to the point of like, if you're trying to fight a boss and you have to, you know, log out or something, you have to make like a whole trek back just to get there. Like, you won't respawn at a checkpoint. You will, you know, respawn at the waypoint, and then you'll have to go through an entire zone again just to get back. I don't know. So some of those are so sprawling too that it seems a little overkill, but I do like things that they put in there, like little secret treasures or optional bosses you can find, which have been some of the tougher bosses I've seen. And, you know, those give their own unique rewards, and all of those are really worth seeking out. And again, kind of channeling, you know, your Dark Souls here, where there's lots of optional bosses you can find. It's really excellent. I get why it's being received so positively. It is early access. It's kind of a weird situation where like anything you complain about, people are like, well, it's early access. Like no complaining. But I paid $30 or whatever for the founder thing or whatever it is. And I'm very much enjoying it. This seems like what I'll be playing for. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to do like a bazillion characters and all this stuff. But this is going to put off, let's say, Indiana Jones until 2025, it seems. So it definitely has its hooks in me. Sometimes you can get a little burned out on it, but I'm really enjoying it so far. Highly recommend, obviously, to not just all ARPG players, but, sort of fantasy game. I'm definitely not going to say looter in the traditional sense. That's another thing, is like there's way less loot here, but I don't really mind that. Like, I don't need Diablo burying you in loot all the time to, have a game be good. I've only gotten, I think, 2 or 3 uniques this entire time, which seems a bit scarce, but like a big part of this is sort of crafting your own super gear in a way that I find kind of unique and refreshing too. We don't see that across too many other games in this genre. So anyway, really enjoying my time. I'll have further follow-up videos here. Obviously Destiny is not doing much right now. Oh, the dawnings today. Oh man. But yeah, really liking the game. Take it with a grain of salt that like I am certainly not an expert in this genre, but I'm just sort of giving my own thoughts here. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.